Hello and welcome to another edition of Mailbag. What is Mailbag? Well, Mailbag is a feature of the channel where you guys leave lots of comments on the channel and I attempt to answer those comments, or if I can't answer those comments, I throw it out to you guys who have more knowledge on some of this stuff than I do. So let's get into the first mailbag of this session. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. Next one comes from Chris Kadar in response to Roland U220, close to the Roland D-70, Moog interested in VST business, a video I did, or mailbag I did in April 2024. And Chris Kadar writes, the Roland D-70 has the advantage of 76 keys and a very good sound, but at the end that's the end of the list on this synthesizer. The build quality seems to be really good until something goes wrong. Well, that's not normally the build quality is very good. The Roland engineers who designed this keyboard cut corners where they really shouldn't have. It would have been nice if the Rolands had made a rack version of the D70, the D770, but unfortunately they didn't. Well, this is the D70, and I've said this many times on the channel before, actually isn't a D series synthesizer at all. It really is a U series synthesizer, and if you go into the machine itself, you will notice that the main circuit board does not have Roland D70, it has Roland U50 written on it. And that's because this was meant to be the next generation of the U20, or the U220, which was the rack mount version. So it was meant to be the sort of slightly bigger expanded version of that particular keyboard, and not actually an LA synthesis driven keyboard at all. So it doesn't use the parameter, the LA parameters like the D20, the D50, etc. It's driven the same way as the U20, and I'm not sure, whether this is fact or fiction. Okay, so because there are quite a few statements that kind of contradict each other on these particular points, but I do believe some of this, the stuff I'm saying now, I do believe is true. But it's very difficult without somebody from Roland coming out and saying yes or no, whether it's true or not. Anyway, the D70 was a rebrand of the Roland U20, and the reason why they did it was because of the Korg M1, which was still in market at the time, and Roland didn't have a synthesizer in the market space between the end of 1988 and when the Korg M1 was released to actually compete with it in the mainstream. So the Korg M1 effectively trounced the D50. D50 was a cracking machine, but the M1 could do so much more. It was effectively rushed through development to get it into the market space quicker to try and compete with the M1. The operating system was hacked late in the development life cycle to provide some effects to try and convince the public that it has some sort of D characteristics. And that, I'm pretty sure that is the case, because it does have an effects, but they're not brilliant, and I think they were put there to try and compete. Now, what I can tell you from my D70 and my experience of playing my D70 is the MIDI implementation on the keyboard is actually not bad, to the point where I used to use the D70 before some of my other keyboards arrived as my master keyboard, because it actually allowed you to control MIDI quite well. And I think this is indicative of where it started out as being the kind of Roppler keyboard to control other keyboards as opposed to a D series synthesizer. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would actually say is that actually the 76 key bed is actually a really nice upgrade to the key beds on the other D-series synthesizers. To me, the other D-series synthesizers are a bit clanky. Now that could be age and could be use. You know, these things, you know, before I got hold of them were used and gigged and God knows what else by other people. So the D-series the D70 synthesizer keyboard that I've got is actually quite a nice keyboard to play. I find it less clunky and quite smooth. Doesn't mean it's a brilliant keyboard, it just means I find it quite nice to play compared with the D-series synthesizers, and it kind of suits my style of playing. And the other thing is it's more minimalistic than the other synthesizers, as in a lot more is menu driven rather than button driven. So if you go and look at the front of the D70, you will notice that a lot more things are hidden in menus than on the other synthesizers. But this also hides the fact that it's not an LA synthesizer, because everything is hidden. Like the main LA bits and bobs are hidden on the D70, the D50 and the D20. But because it's all hidden in menus, it's very hard to actually draw a direct comparison. But that's my view. But I do find the D70 a far more appeasing instrument on the eye than the other D-series synths, which are kind of a bit boxy. This kind of started to introduce sort of more curves, and I suspect it's kind of went down that route because manufacturing, as you know, the kind of injection molding and all those other processes allowed them to actually produce molds that had more curvatures, more flowing shapes to them than the kind of angular synths that we had before. If you look back, all the synths prior to that were angular synths, and then you know the synths started to become sort of more curvy. They had more appeal to them. Now, of course, the problem with that is that if you damage a curvy synth, it's a much more difficult to repair than a more boxy synth, because you haven't got angles. You've got, you know, you've got to kind of fix it. And I have, you know, I've watched people repair curved synthesizers, and it's kind of lots of body filler and stuff like that. Next comment or question comes from Hedge777. In response to Yamaha SY77 live performances, Roland System 1 not working on Mac, a mailbag I did in July 2024. And Hedge writes, I understood that their question was about the SY77 and its use in a live performance situation, left a lot to interpretation. But if I were to guess, and this is only because I get a lot of similar questions on my channel, they were likely asking about the layers and splits. The SY77 doesn't have a performance mode as we know it and love it. It has a multi-mode that acts as like a sequencer mode. So instead, one has to go through a single mode, utilise the maximum of 2 AWM or 2 FM elements that can be combined into layers and splits in configuration that will work in the live setup. Well, I really don't know. I think if I remember correctly, this was a question where I really didn't understand the question that was being asked. So thanks for your input, an alternative view on that particular question, and we'll leave it at that.